Good evening. This is my very first SQL lesson, and I am going to talk to you today about nothing. More specifically, I'm going to talk to you about the value null. So I am starting with a table here of customers, and you can see here we have a customer ID. This is our primary key, so each one is unique. We have customer names, addresses, phone numbers, and fax numbers, which for a number of customers are listed as null. Now, a null is commonly known as nothing, the value that is not a value, because we simply do not know. Now, it's important to realize that this is not the same as zero. You can perform mathematical operations with zero, but you can't do so with null. You can multiply something by zero, you can't multiply anything by null, because we really don't know what null is. So if your shipping date is null, it could be it just hasn't shipped yet, and we will find out once it ships. In this case, these customers may have a fax machine, but didn't provide it for us. We just don't know. It's null. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to try inserting another row in this table with some null values. So if we insert into our customers table, and we will use the parentheses to specify which columns we want here. We definitely want customer ID. That cannot be null as the primary key. We'll want to have a first name, a last name, and we found out who this was, but we didn't really get their address. So let's just put their phone number in. And we've specified what columns we want. Now we got to put the values for those columns. And those values are going to be, let's see, first one, we want to use a unique customer ID. It could be 26. And Bob. For a string of characters, we use these single quotation marks around the values. And note that I will be using those quotation marks around the phone number as well. And that is because our phone number is actually stored as character values as well. We're not going to be performing mathematical operations with phone numbers, so it actually makes more sense to use a character data type. So let's see how this works. Oh, we have an error. So it says cannot insert the value null into column customer address, which means we tried to skip the address, but this column is not allowed to be null. So let's do a little bit of troubleshooting. Now, what we would do in Oracle is we would use the describe function, but describe command, and we can't do that because we are using SQL Server. So in that case, we will instead use the same equivalent here, which is to execute the system stored procedure for columns. And this will give us all sorts of wonderful data about our customers table. And here we are. So we have each column name listed here with lots of column attributes. And toward the end here, we have a list of which ones can or cannot be null. So this is nullable column. So you can see that the customer first name and the customer fax are the only values that are allowed to be null. And so when making a table, you have to be really aware of which columns you want to allow to be null. Now this is probably a list of customers based on online orders, which would mean that by definition you're going to get an address and that cannot be null. If you were looking for a list of, say, sales referrals, you might want to be able to build that list bigger without necessarily having every single referral person's address. So really you think about the purpose of your table and how you're gathering your data in terms of whether or not a value should be allowed to be null. And with numerical values, you have to be extra careful with those because you don't want to mistake a null value for a 0 or treat them the same way, because they are definitely two very different concepts.